using Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, but InDesign is going to be the primary program that we'll be using. And I know that InDesign is probably, from past experience with teaching this class before, unfamiliar to a lot of you. And part of its unfamiliarity that you've used it with, you've probably used it in such a ways that it seemed kind of like a dumb version of Illustrator. It doesn't have, it's a vector program like Illustrator is, but it doesn't have Illustrator's full suite of tools. So why InDesign? Well, first of all, typography is where InDesign shines. InDesign gives you just a lot more typographical control if you know where to look for it, and sometimes it's a little bit confusing where to look for it. It gives you just more control than any of the other programs, and it also gives you that control if you know to look for it, which is to say that most of you are still pretty early in your journey as typographers. So a lot of the controls and the things that you have the ability to do in InDesign are things that you don't necessarily appreciate yet. It also gives you opportunities for text and image interactions. That's in addition to sort of being the best program for typography, it is for the interactions of text and images, creating sort of complex and rich pages. It also allows you to flow text from one box to another, and that's what we'll be doing today, or when you do this project. And it also gives you well, I could really use these terms interchangeably, master pages and templates. And that gives you a fixed something that can be on every page in your multi-page document. So for example, a page number is the most obvious thing that you might put on a page, on a template, but it also might be a logo or an element, anything that you want to repeat throughout the document. You could put it on your master page, and you can have that element throughout. And then it also lets you do multi-page documents. Both Illustrator and Photoshop now let you have multiple artboards within a document, but that's really a different sort of thing because those artboards can be any different size, and they have to be, well, created individually and drawn out. Whereas with the master pages, you have a page size for the size of your magazine or the size of your book or the size of your brochure, whatever it is, that's going to be the same and give you a set of guidelines. And that's the other thing you could do with a master page, is you can have guidelines so that you can have consistency throughout your document. Now, those are all the things that we're going to talk about in this class and we'll be working with in the weeks ahead. But InDesign does give you a couple of other features as well, and that includes various ways to automate formatting. It gives you ways to collaborate with writers and editors, and it also is the program for EPUBs. If you download a book from Amazon, odds are strong that it was created in InDesign. So let me just give you an example of that. So here I have, we're going to talk a little bit about style sheets, but Illustrator allows you to create a style sheet. InDesign allows you to create a style sheet too. I mean, you're going to start out using style sheets, and then we'll be talking about creating your own style sheets for your own magazine as we go on. But if you look at Illustrator's box, it just gives you so much fewer categories of control, and if you were to click on these, there would be probably fewer things within them too. So InDesign gives you like just all this extra control over typography that Illustrator doesn't give you yet, and that's, again, it's doesn't matter unless you know that you have things you want to do. So let's look at a couple of the other things. This is a test page, and this is one example of the sort of complexity you can get fairly easily in InDesign that would just take you all day in Illustrator. So if you look at this listing, and this is all contained in a single text frame, and we'll look at those in a minute. We have 1, 2, uh, we have three lines in three different styles, and then this start of this is in bold. So we have then a lighter text, and then the pattern. Oops, let's go back to that. The pattern repeats, and you can see that's a lot of complexity, and that's a very complex hierarchy in just a small amount of space. And if you were to try to do that in Illustrator, it would take all day. But InDesign, actually, this is the first page of it was typically a 7 to 10 page section of the newspaper. And because of the ability to automate text formatting, this section probably took around 20 minutes of the designer's time. And InDesign, once you're good at InDesign and proficient at InDesign, projects like this become that would be practically undoable in Illustrator become fast and efficient. And then another example, and this is also a fairly complex hierarchy here, but the other thing I wanted to show you was the way the text is wrapping around this sandwich. And that could be done like manually in Illustrator. You could flush write those lines and you could break them, but you don't have to do that in InDesign. InDesign, you just set this up with what's called a text wrap, and I will be demonstrating that in the weeks ahead, but you can certainly do a search or a lynda.com video, and you could learn how to set up a text wrap on your own page as well. But all of this sort of thing would be just impossible in Illustrator, and is fairly easy and efficient in InDesign. So I have sent everyone this file. Let's just scroll that in, and we'll just look at a couple of the elements here and a couple of ways you might assemble a long form document. Now, one of the things that you may have come across in Illustrator or Photoshop up to now is that when you bring in a image from somewhere else, the image is not actually brought into your InDesign document. What is created by InDesign is a low resolution version of that image just for placement. And the actual image is created, it is still back in your Photoshop file. So the thing to know, and this is true pretty much for Illustrator as well, is if you bring an image into InDesign, you have to keep that image. That image is not here. What happens is that image is linked back to the location on your computer, and then when you make your PDF or you send it to press or send it to the printer, whatever you're doing, this image, which is just a proxy for the real image, is substituted out, and so the PDF gets the high resolution image. Now, I did not send these images to you. I have them here on my links panel. So it is finding all of these and it's linking back to them. But if you look at your links panel, oh, and by the way, if you're opening up InDesign for the first time, you may be looking at a very different workspace. This is the default InDesign workspace, just called Essentials, and it's a very dumbed down workspace. So I recommend either Typography or Advanced. Those are almost the same, not exactly the same. And that will give you some of the menus that you see here that you may not see on your screen. So I have these images, but you won't, but that's okay. You can still use the proxies to accomplish this project. Now, the fonts I chose for this project I chose them because they are all on the lab computers back at school, which obviously we don't have access to. So if you don't have the fonts, if you don't see the fonts that you're seeing here, you can just replace them with different fonts. But I want you to, we'll take a look at that. If you don't have them, your fonts will be pinked out like my folio here. Let's just zoom in on that. So that pink indicates that I am missing that font. It is somewhere else. And where it is, if I click on it, if I click on this text frame, I can select it. If I click on this thing, I can select it. But this folio I cannot select, and that is because it is on my master page. And this happens to be a document with just one master page. InDesign creates one master automatically whenever you create a new document. And this is my A master. That's how InDesign, you could give them different names if you want, but this is sort of the default name. And if you look at the A in each of these corners of this document, that's indicating that this document is based on that A folder, that A master. And so let's just look at the master briefly. It has, first of all, these automatic margins and guides. And this happens to be a 3-column master, but we could, for example, create a duplicate list master spread. And we now have a B master. And I can select that B master. And let's say I want to make it a 2-column master. I could say layout, margins, and columns. And it's now a 2-column master. And there are other things you could do as well. But we're going to stick to the 3 for this. And let's zoom in on that folio. And I am just going to Union Pro, let's just make it regular. And I will do, no, I don't need to for the other side because that's just a number. So all of this you have control over. So what I'm going to do is I have some formats. Now for the headline, I created just a quick headline format, which is not something you would normally do with a style sheet, but I did it for this one just for the sake of expediency. And for the lead, for a first start of an article is in the magazine business referred to as just the lead. This is referred to as the deck. It's sort of like a lot of articles have a short headline and then a little bit more explanation under the headline. That's the deck. Almost all articles have bylines. Indicates who wrote them unless they were really short. And we have the start of the body. Now, if you were at an actual magazine that might have 6 or 7 features in a typical month and would have a format that is repeated the next month, it pays to put all of these styles, all of these styles that the magazine is, and we'll talk about body in the next week. It pays to put them all into sort of codify how they're used in the form of style sheets. And so I have here paragraph styles, and here are all my styles. And just to make sure everything is the same at first, what I like to do is I like to say Command, or I think Control A for all, Command all, or you could just go to edit, select all, and you could see, and this is true across the Creative Suite, the key command for getting that, or whether you're on a Mac or a PC. So we could say Command all, and I select body, and there is my body copy. And if you're seeing pink and you want to change that, what you can do is just pick a font sort of similar, roughly similar to it. Let's just choose, I will choose Miller, which I wouldn't actually do for that, but just to show you. And then if you decide you like that, you'll see that we've changed our style, and we can tell I've changed it because next to body, it has a little plus sign by it. And if I just say redefine style, then the decision will populate through everything. But I don't want to do that. But if you're missing the font and you want to do that, you can. So I'm just going to say Command Z for undo, and Command Z again for undo again, and I'll just stick with this box. Now, the other thing about this box you'll notice is that there's this little red frame here, and that's indicating that it is overflowing. And so what I want this text to do is flow into the next column. So I'm going to click on that, and my cursor is now sort of full of text. And if I click, a box fills up exactly to my grid, and that's something InDesign does on purpose. But if I didn't want it to fit to my grid, I could draw it out. I could click and drag, and I would have a frame that way too. But in this case, I do want it to fit to my grid, so I will just pull it there. So my styles have moved, or my things have moved around a little bit, but let's just go back to paragraph style, and I know that this is the byline, and this is the deck, and this is the headline, and you can design it yourself if you prefer, but I have a headline style here for you, and I just applied the headline style, and all my text just vanished from my document, and that is because my headline is just too big to fit in any of these narrow little columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to my black arrow tool, because I'm working on the page geometry, not the typography. And I am going to click here and go to the top of the page. And in this case, I am going to draw out that box so that it is big enough to hold my headline, which is in headline style. There's my deck. And for most articles, I would keep the byline here inside the box and line it up with the top of the column next door. But in this case, but you could put it with this information instead. Most readers don't care hugely about what who the name of the author is, so often that information isn't really big. So now that I've done with this, I can move it out of the way. And if you'll notice, these arrows, even though they're outside the box, are moving with the box. It's because they're what's called anchored, and there are a couple of ways to accomplish anchoring. But if you remember the bars that were with some of those pages I showed you, those were all anchored objects. So the bars, you don't have to worry about moving them individually. They move with the column, so they can go with the page. So for view, let's go to fit spread in window. And now we can finish spreading, putting this text throughout this document. And so let's click there, just fill this up as far as we can get it. So we have a couple of end pieces. So this is what's called a subhead because it's looking at a smaller amount of information. So to break up the text and to indicate where things are. And did I create a style for this one? I don't think I did. So let's just make it subhead, but make it a little bit bigger. And you can make type bigger up here. And let's also make it flush left. I think I'm going to eliminate that space so it knits to the text that comes below it. I think I'm going to bring the way down. Now, sometimes it's useful to see what is going on underneath the text. And so I'm going to go to type and I'm going to say show hidden characters. And and one of the things you'll notice is there's a paragraph symbol. If we zoom in on that, at the end of every paragraph, and a little blue dot for a space. And this little thing is indicating a tab, and that's how this paragraph is made. Is it's just tabbed in. But if we wanted it flush, we could eliminate the tab or put the tab back. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I want to bring the ways down. And I could do it with a regular hard return, but I can hold my shift while I hit return, and I could get what's called a soft return, or a return within the paragraph, and that can be a little bit useful sometimes. So text is flowed out, and I have not gotten to the end of my document, so let's just do that. So this is going to be a 6-page document. I just use the key command to get to that view. Okay, so now we need to get this text to fit and fill out this entire document. And so what I'm going to do is, these are all separate text frames, but I can grab them all and I can move them as a unit. So I think I'm going to put a little bit less text on this page and maybe move my headline back. And then I want to carve out some space just to rough this feature out for photographs. So I'm going to do that again. I'm just going to push these all down. So let's have a photo there, say, and a photo there. And actually, maybe let's eliminate a couple of those frames. And when you do that, you saw it may have seen a bit of movement. It's just going to flow and fill in the gap. And so now we're in a pretty good place for this one. So actually, let's make one big photograph there, and maybe I'll make room for a pull quote since I have a style for it there. And then we have room for a little photograph there, but let's just rough out let's just move these features. We have the photo of the love lock, so let's just grab these two. And to get them both, I'm just holding down my shift key. Actually, I think I'll leave that one there. You can put these photos wherever you want. You can use them all. You could use as many of them as you want. Let's just grab those three. And move this one here. Now the grid, and we'll talk more about grids in the week ahead, is really for the little text. A headline can go off of grid or all the way to the edge of the sheet. So another thing this document has, and you have to create this on purpose, is what's called a bleed line. When you're doing a print project, a picture would never go to the edge of the paper. It would always go past, because what happens is the pages are printed and then they're trimmed. And if they're not trimmed perfectly, if it just went to the edge, you might get a white gap between the picture. So it always goes past the edge. So I'm going to go to Object, Fitting, and I'm going to say fill frame proportionally. In other words, I don't want it to distort the picture, which can be easy to do. You can also, let's say, if you want to resize this, and you can see that this frame is just acting as a crop for the picture, but we can move it in. And it's really easy to distort that picture and make it unrecognizable. So if you don't want to do that, you can use the fitting controls, or you can hold down the shift key when you resize it, and that keeps it proportional. So there is that picture. And I'm just going to use the key command for filling that frame proportionally. And on a Mac, that just happens to be Command Option Shift C. And let's just pick a little bit of a pull quote before we move in. Let's just pick this and say copy, or Command C, and you can also find that under Edit for copy, and Command V or paste puts it in the box. And because this is a paragraph style, we can just choose pull quote. And a lot of times what I'll do when I design an actual magazine article is I will start with kind of a generic pull quote style, and then I will redo it and redefine the style for that document. So pull quotes within this one document will look the same. And that's the anchored rule I was talking about. So there is that. Oh, and the one thing we forgot to do up here is the lead paragraph. Let's just do that quickly. And that's something else you could do in InDesign, is this is automatically bold, just the first line, and it doesn't matter where that line ends. We can make that line longer, and just whatever is on that first line is going to be bold. And that's called building, that's called a nested style or line style, and you can build one style into another one. And we'll talk more about that as we get more into style sheets. So for my last page, maybe I'll pick this photo, and in this case I'm just going to cut them, or Command X them. Let's go to that last spread and Command V or paste them here. So I think I'm going to make this restaurant shot the big one. Obviously, when you do this, you have to do it exactly as I do. Let's make sure that's all the way to the margin and fill that proportionally. Now for this one, I'm going to put it there, but I'm going to move the text out of the way using a different method, just so you know that it's there. And I'm going to do it with a text wrap. And so I can, if you look at the top of my frame, these are the text wrap buttons. Here's also a text wrap menu item, since it comes up pretty frequently. And you can click that button and it will push the text away. And actually, if we want it to be a little bit bigger, we can just push a little bit of extra white space, or if we don't like the white space around it, these will probably be locked, meaning they'll all go the same way for you. By default, that's how InDesign usually is, but we can also just push that text aside so that it's not right up against the picture. So this can have a simple form of that other type of type interaction, but you could do it. So now we're overflowing this box. So I'm just want to find out how overflowing I am. And the answer is quite a bit. So let's start by making this image smaller and make these a little bit bigger. Now we're down to a few lines. So when you're trying to get something to fit, and by the way, it's usually best if everything fits in your document, perfectly. These fill up the whole columns. There's no awkward spaces at the end, and to make this look neat and professional, it should end exactly at the end of this article. Obviously, it shouldn't overflow because then the reader would run out of information, and it shouldn't end early because it makes the page look a little bit unfinished. So you always want it to fit exactly right. So what we're going to do is, I think, to get those last few lines, let's make this one just a hair smaller, sort of like I sometimes talk about in terms of this being like the type is like water flowing around the rocks, and bigger rocks will displace more water. What you never want to do is change the size of your body type. There are things that can change, but generally speaking, this is a big part of any magazine or publications brand, and you want that consistent and readable. A lot of time and attention goes into making beautiful body copy, and so you don't want to mess with that. But what I am willing to do is to squeeze a little bit. And so under our paragraph controls, and InDesign gives you sort of a character heavy format and a paragraph heavy. Let's just switch to paragraph. And, I'm not seeing it. Oh, here we go. It is character. I usually just use the key commands for this. I'm just going to squeeze that in a little bit. And let's look for a couple other places where we could do that. And there's also key commands for this, which is just Option and your left right arrows. And we've just created an orphan, which is something I try to avoid. That looks like a candidate. And that's more squeezed than I would probably do it. I usually don't go more than what InDesign's default is, which is -20, but I have mine set a little bit for finer control. So now we're fitting, but I have this headline at the top of the article. So I think what I'll do is bring my extra return down so this still lines up, and that lines up with the top. And let's just loosen that. That would be Option and my right arrow. And that looks like we're fit. So if I had to, it's because of the wrap. I think we didn't lose a line. So that's fit. And so there's a feature, and so that's your project for this week. I usually do it as an in-class project, but obviously we can't do that. Is just rough out this feature. Oh, let's just finish that opening spread. Just keep this as my opener. Okay. So as you can see, these are style sheets you didn't make and have no affection for, but having style sheets can make your design just a much more efficient and fast. And so I just want you to get in the habit of figuring out how to apply them and how to flow text through a document. And in the weeks ahead, you'll be making your own style sheets and your own branding for your own publication.